In this video, we'll talk about how to prepare our images, which will include resizing, cropping, and exporting those images so that we can use them in our project. So first of all, we want to get a sense of where we're going. In this example, we actually have wireframes that we're working from, which you can find if you open the course project demo in Figma, and then go to the site pages page over on the left there. So I can navigate around by holding the spacebar and clicking and dragging. That makes it a lot easier to kind of move around rather than having to just scroll all the time. And as I do, I can see that we have images of a few different sizes. The wireframes have actually been pretty meticulous to be consistent with sizing. So you can see that the sample product here on the full page is 460 pixels wide and 320 pixels high. The cover image for articles are 760 pixels wide, 420 pixels high. Everywhere else, it seems like we have the product tiles that are down at this 360 by 240, which is the same as what we have our smaller article covers, 360 by 240, and those same sizes are used for article and products over here. Now the sort of most recent or featured article is also at 760 by 420, the same as over here. So if we think about the way we're going to use our images and try to be consistent with the sizes across our site, that's going to help things out a good bit. So what it boils down to is we want to put or prepare our article images at the large size and at the small size. And we want to do the same for our product images at the small thumbnail size and at the larger actual product page size. Okay, so that's where we're headed. And now you will certainly be free to change the sizes as you see fit for your own project. But the closer you stick to the wireframes, the closer you'll be to the actual work that we're doing here in these demo videos. Okay, so you should have a page called Scratch. For the record, all these pages were just added by the original designer using this plus sign and then just naming the page. And then we actually put artboards or frames on these pages using the add frame tool here. The rest is just sort of adding all the different type elements and images and some other things that we'll cover as we get further on. So when we go to the Scratch page, this is actually a completely open blank canvas that we can do anything we'd like with, and it's where we will do the work preparing our images. So you may recall in the last portion of this deliverable, we collected all these images. So all I'm going to do is click and drag to drop them into this canvas. Now I can also zoom in and out by holding Command and then scrolling. And the keyboard shortcut on a PC should be similar. As I scroll up and down, I can see, try to get them all in view, and I can see that the smallest one here is 670 pixels, which is slightly smaller than we're going to need for our actual canvas. So I may need to go find a different image to use for that one. This one here is, let's see, these two seem to be narrower, and they both seem to be just wide enough to fit inside of the image. So I'll have to deal with this image on its own a little bit later. I can certainly demonstrate the concept with you for the rest of these images. Okay, so let's talk about creating the larger variation of these first of all. So the largest variation that we want is at 760 by 420. Now, if you've worked with other tools like InDesign, you may be familiar with the idea of frames where an image is cropped by a frame. So there's actually the potential that there's more image that's kind of outside of the box than is shown. And it's really nice that Figma actually works this way by default. So you see if I change this image's height, it's not actually squishing the image, it's actually cropping the image. And if I drag it larger, you see the image is actually enlarging. Okay, so that's good to know about because it means that we're gonna, if we leave these settings just as they are at least, that our images are going to flexibly scale depending on the size of the frame that we've got them in. Now we want to be careful to not size up from here because it could make our images become pixelated. Anytime you try to go larger than the natural aspect ratio, you can end up with blurry pixelated images. And that's why we checked to make sure that everything was larger. So if we try to make this guy larger, we could get some blurring, and so that's why we need to find a larger image to start with for that one. But we can certainly take all of these and change them down to that 760 width. So I'm just going to go and type in each one of them 760, and you can see that they all now scale down to be that 760 size. Now I can also do a little trick when I have all these selected. Oh, actually, we'll skip on that trick for now. I'm just going to, once again, bring them all close together. All right, now let's go remind ourselves of what the height we wanted was, and it's 420. So if I go back to my scratch pad and change these to 420, now they have all, oops, and that's a good thing to note that when I change them all to a height of 420, we see we changed the width away from what we had set it. That's because the aspect ratio is locked by default. So I'm going to undo that and unlock that aspect ratio, and now change this to 420. And now you see we got the cropping that we wanted. Okay, so I'm going to align them again, and now we can kind of evaluate what we have. Okay, so what I'm looking for now is just to make sure that as I resize these to a different size, that I still kind of have the focus of the image the way I would like. Okay, so let's say, for example, that we aren't very happy with the way this one focused, and that his head is kind of close to the top there. If we wanted to sort of have him slide down and sit further down in the frame, we actually have some options to change the way that this is resizing. First of all, we don't want to just enlarge the size, because that changes the size of the image, and we want to avoid that. But what we can do instead is come over here to the image here, and you can see that this image is actually one fill for this shape. Okay, so it is an image that is filling the shape, and we have other options here, such as using a solid color or linear or radial gradient, among other options. So when we pull this out, though, that we see that the image is right now set to fill the image. The image can also fit, crop, or tile. So if we change it to crop, now you can see that we get something much like the frame concept in InDesign, where we can actually drag this image, and if I hold shift, it will keep it in the vertical alignment. I can drag it down. I'm going to zoom in and just make sure that I haven't dragged it below the top of the frame there. I can even use my arrow keys to nudge it up a pixel at a time. So I'm just basically bringing it as low down as I can. So notice as well that I can even independently resize these two things if I wanted to do that. Let's say that I wanted to have the actual image larger inside of this frame. I can simply drag that way, and notice that if you hold shift as you drag, it will maintain the aspect ratio of the image so that you don't squish it. If you don't hold shift and you drag, you may end up squishing or stretching this guy, and we don't need him to change any of his own aspect ratio, do we? So if we wanted the image to be focusing on him, we could actually adjust the image like so. Okay, so that's adjusting the image itself. We can also even independently edit the frame that is cropping this. Now, I don't necessarily want to do this right now because I actually want this at the size that I had it before. So I'm going to undo that. But you can see how we were able to independently move the image apart from the frame that it's sitting in. And once again, we're going to try to get that just down there. And I think I want more of the computers in the shot there as well. Okay, I can just press return. And now that new adjustment of the image has been stored. Okay, so we have each of our cover size images. Of course, we do the fifth one as well. Now let's talk about getting them into that thumbnail size. So again, let's go check out what that thumbnail size was. And here you can see that we have these examples of the thumbnail size, and it's 360 by 240. So let's go back to our scratch pad. Click and drag to select all of these. And if you hold the Option or Alt key and then you click and drag, you'll actually duplicate. You can even also hold Shift, and it will sort of lock so that you don't accidentally, nudge your spacing alignment off from what it was. Okay, so we've got these now, and I've already forgotten my number. It is 360 by 240. Okay, so we go back to the scratch, 360 by 240. Okay, all right, so we have now resized these, and I think overall I'm also still happy with the arrangement, although I should catch that this guy got a little bit squished. Okay, see how he does not look quite the same size? He's smaller, but he's also skinnier there, isn't he? And it looks stretched, so we want to fix that, all right? So I'm gonna click on this again, and I'm gonna revert it back to where it's filling so that it's doing so at the same aspect ratio, okay? So it's actually, as it's filling, it's actually looking just fine to me at that size. So I think I'm going to leave it like this, but bear in mind that if you did want to adjust it, you can now switch to crop and, you know, go in here and continue to edit the way that it's sitting inside of that frame. Okay. All right, so that's given us our two different sizes for our articles, but let's note to make a thoughtful adjustment to what we've done with each of these. So here we have the large versions, which I'm just gonna now drag all up to the top here, and then here we have the small versions. As I prepare to export these, it's going to help things immensely if I think now about the names for these things. So for these large sets, I should make sure that I actually have all of them named consistently. So I'm going to double click on the layer to rename it. So this is going to be called cover. Okay, it's the Envision tips. Okay, so they are all named with the cover prefix and then by the name of the article. Okay, so now let's do a different version where we do the name them basically sort of like the thumbnail or the smaller version. So in this version, let's see, what if we renamed this, oops, so first of all, it was cover Envision tips would be the large version name. So let's do thumb Envision tips. Okay, so I'm just going to now copy that little prefix and put it in front of each of my other ones. If I can get the selection there. Okay, great. So now I've consistently named each of these items and they are ready to export. But first, let's talk about how to do the products. So once again, I'm going to go find my product images and I'm going to drag them into the canvas here. Now they're in a variety of different sizes, and we have some additional things to consider here in that this one is sitting on transparency. These are all sitting on white. That's good. Where we want to go is to have them all sitting on white, but they're also all kinds of different sizes. So let's ask first what size we want them to be for our actual site pages. So remember, we have the thumbnail size for our products, and we have the larger version for the products. So let's make sure, first of all, that we have everything at least this large. 460 by 320. Let's see, this one looks to be the smallest one, and it is indeed at least that big. Okay, so everybody's in good shape. Let's select them all, unlock their ratio, and go to 460 by 320. Okay, so they have all done the magical thing of resizing. I'm going to just evenly distribute them. That's called an auto layout feature. Actually, I think I want them all up beside each other like this. Again, I can do that same idea by saying they all need to be top aligned and tidy up their spacing, and then I can tweak it a little bit. Okay, so now that I see them all side by side, we have a tricky challenge ahead of us in that you can see this is by default cropping these images out a good bit. We also don't have the white background behind this one. So let's first talk about how we can get the white background in to make sure that this one is going to be consistent. What we're going to do is click on the shape and go over here next to fill and click the plus sign. And then instead of linear, we're going to click on this and change it to solid. So this is going to put a solid fill, which right now is also, and it's set to white, so we could drag it around and change the color. But white is what we want. It's also now sitting on top of that image, so I'm going to click and drag to get that image to go up above. And I found that this is a little buggy. There we go. So what we want is the image on top and the color down below. All right, so what that means now is that in this case, where the image was transparent, we're getting that nice white fill color behind it. Okay, so now we just need to actually resize this image. So I'm going to switch it to crop. And again, as we resize the headphones, I'm going to hold shift so that we keep it at the same aspect ratio. And what I'm going to do is just generally look to set it kind of centered inside of this space without being too close to the edges, particularly from a white space perspective. So that we've got a little bit of white space around each edge, and every now and then I may need to escape out of the selection mode to kind of check it. So right now it looks like it's sitting a little low, and there's too much space up here. So I'm going to double click in to change it again, and then just use my arrow keys to nudge it up, press return to get out, and I'm happy with that. Okay, let's do the same thing for this guy here. So we're going to switch him to crop. And we're going to just make sure that we get just enough above the image, just enough white space, that is, above and below it. Okay, now that we have resized it, we can see that we also need to add that white background in behind here so that we get the white fill on either side. So I'm going to add a solid white fill. Okay, and then we're going to see if that drag goes any better here. Okay, we got it down. Okay, so you can see now that we have the two side by side, and I can see a little more clearly that I think I want that image a little smaller so that it sits and looks nice next to the other one. So I'm centering it in the space. I'm just using my arrow keys to nudge it around. So it's got a little space above and below, and it's otherwise kind of sitting centered in that frame and looking quite nice. So we're going to repeat that for all of these other images until we get them all looking nice and consistent with that size there. Okay, so there you can see how all of my product images lined up. I think I need to just do a little bit more tweaking on this guy. Okay, and that looks pretty nice. All right, next we're going to create the smaller version. So let's go check what we need over there. Looks like these should be 360 by 240. So let's go back to our scratch pad. Now, when we change these, we're going to end up with all kinds of problems, again, because they're going to squish and stretch and all that other stuff. So we're just a heads up, we're going to have to do more of that work. But anyway, let's give it a shot. 360 by 240. And they have all stretched out. So again, we're going to go in and just change them to fill, switch them back to crop again, and resize so that they look nice inside of their frames. Okay, so we'll continue this work until we get everything looking the way we want it to. All right, we now have them all resized and looking very nice. Last step, of course, is to make sure that we renamed them in a way that they are going to be easy to recognize later when we move these into our site. So right now they all have the same name. I'm fine with product for the larger ones, but let's do product thumb for the smaller ones. Just going to drop cover product thumb into each of these file names. All right, and we are good to go. So we have all of our articles, we have all of our products, and the last step we need to do is export these. So we can do them one at a time, click on the image and then choose export. But if we know that they're all going to have the same settings, we can also select them all at once by clicking and dragging, and then clicking export. Click the plus sign here, and you can select the file format you would like. I typically go with PNG. JPEG is also another optional option. Excellent option, I should say. And we can even toggle a preview to see what they would all look like. It takes a little bit of time to process those. I'm fairly confident they'll turn out just fine. So now that we have them all selected and we are using the PNG option, we can choose export 18 layers. Now this is going to save all of these wherever we drop them, so I'm going to just put them in a new folder here, image exports, and save. Now they will all export to that folder, so if I go look in my file system in that image exports folder, you can see they're all here at just the size that we need them for our site. So the last step then is to get these little guys into our site. So we switch to our project in Code Sandbox, and then we can upload these images. So we'll right click on our images folder and choose upload files, and then we'll go point to the image export folder, and then we can select all those files and upload them, and they will all shortly be up here in Code Sandbox. Great, they're here, consistently named and ready to use. All right, one last thing before we wrap up here is that I found a higher resolution version of this image. And so we're going to walk through the same process we did to get it resized to 760 by 420. Okay, now the thing I wanted to point out here with this image is that we are in a situation where we need to make an editorial change in terms of how this crops. It's definitely more significant than what we had over here with this image. You may recall we were tweaking around with that earlier, in that I'm not really happy with the way the shapes are sitting here. It's a little bit awkward to have a shape just so close to the edge, kind of creating a tangent. So we're definitely going to go in here and choose crop and try to figure out what's better. Now, obviously, as we move this up, we're cropping out more of the top of that mirror, but I think that's going to be okay. All right, so I'm happy with that kind of cropping here, and of course we can do something similar as we resize it to fit at the different orientation as well.